Dust rose in the street like a ghost unwilling to settle, clinging to skirts, boots, even the air itself. The whole town looked dried and worn, but yet the townsfolk looked as new as the day that they were born. At the center of that swirling haze, a cry, high, broken, desperate, sliced through the stillness. Can you imagine the feeling of that stillness being broken? A little girl, no older than 5 summers, burst from the crowd, clutching a swaddled newborn against her thin chest. What could have caused such a scene in a quiet town like this? Barefoot, her hair wild, her face streaked with tears that cut paths through the grime. The tears tell a story themselves, don't they? Grandma's whipping Mama in the street for birthing us, she sobbed. The words tumbled out in one long rush, as if simply uttering them would somehow stop the sting of the belt that cracked behind her. You could feel the shame of the moment just by hearing the little girl's cries for help. The weight of those words, especially on someone so young, must have been immense. Ever heard that phrase, children should be seen, not heard? Well, that little girl was heard all right, and her cries echoed far beyond that dusty street. But do you know how to solve problems like this? If so, please feel free to leave your answers down below in the comment section. The town had gathered, as towns always did, when shame was to be publicly displayed. Shopkeepers abandoned their counters, women pulled aprons over their heads, boys grinned from their perches on hitching posts. They circled wide around the scene, their whispers sharper than the leather. In the dirt, Eliza May knelt, arms raised in a pitiful shield, her once fine calico dress torn at the shoulder. Now, put yourself in Eliza May's shoes. What thoughts must have been racing through her mind? She seemed torn between fight and flight, her body trembling in anticipation of the next blow. The image of her kneeling, defenseless, is a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play in this small town. Her mother, stern, rigid, gray hair coiled like rope, brought the strap down again. Each strike wasn't just punishment, but proclamation, that sin had been birthed here, and it would be marked for all to see. Men shifted uneasily, some muttering that a woman shouldn't be beaten in the street, but none stepped forward to help. What did they fear? Did they fear the shame would transfer to them? To interfere was to inherit the stain, a stain they couldn't risk. Did they even care? The preacher stood stiff, Bible pressed to his chest, lips moving, though no sound came. He was waiting, perhaps, for the lash to finish its sermon before offering scripture. The child ran straight into the legs of a tall rancher standing apart from the circle. His shirt was patched, his boots dust-scoured, his face shadowed by the brim of a sweat-stained hat. Jonas Harrow bent slowly, calloused hands lifting the child before she could fall. The newborn wailed, startled by the jolt, and he steadied the tiny body with a gentleness at odds with his rough exterior. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low as the creak of saddle leather. We encourage our audiences to like and subscribe to our Saddle and Sixskin channel. The girl's chest heaved against him, her eyes huge, searching his weathered face as though begging for rescue. Behind them, the preacher finally raised his voice, calling above the hush, "Suffer, little children, and forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." The words carried, but they rang thin against the crack of leather and the sobs of a grown woman humiliated before her neighbors. Jonas's jaw tightened. He'd seen calves left to die in a ditch, colts whipped until their spirit broke, widows starve on the edge of town while sermons filled the air. How much can one man take before he is pushed to his breaking point? He'd watched enough to know when silence was complicity. The grandmother's arm rose again. This time Jonas stepped forward. His boots struck the dust with deliberate weight, cutting through the circle. Conversations died. Eyes followed. He set the girl on her feet but kept the newborn in his arms, holding the tiny life as though it were the most natural thing he'd ever done. "What do you think would happen next?" "That's enough," he said. The words weren't loud, but they carried. Perhaps it was the tone, steady like a post driven deep into the ground, that silenced the jeers more than the command itself. The grandmother wheeled on him, face flushed. "This is my blood, my shame to scour clean. You'll not meddle in it." Jonas didn't argue. What could he say? He looked instead at Eliza May, still kneeling, shoulders trembling beneath the tatters of her dress. In her eyes flickered both defiance and despair, as if she couldn't decide whether to rise or vanish into the dust. She tried to speak, but no words formed. He extended a hand, not to the grandmother, not to the crowd, but to Eliza. "Did you think he would? You'll never face this alone," he said simply. "Come with me. Please take a moment to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin." A ripple moved through the onlookers. Some scoffed, others shifted as if the ground beneath them had changed. The grandmother's mouth opened, ready to lash out again, but for the first time, her hand faltered. Perhaps it was the sight of her grandchild clinging to Jonas's leg, or the newborn pressed to his chest, calm now as though soothed by his steady heartbeat. Eliza May hesitated, her breath ragged. The shame of years weighed heavy on her back, pressing her into the dirt. To take his hand was to invite another kind of judgment. Whispers that she had leapt from one disgrace to another, but to refuse was to leave her children unshielded. The preacher cleared his throat, his voice shaking. "Brother Jonas, you take upon yourself a heavy yoke. Think well before." Jonas cut in, his eyes never leaving Eliza's for a heartbeat. "I've thought." The whole town seemed to lean in, suspended. The dust hung unmoving. Even the newborn stilled, as if the air itself were waiting for her choice. Slowly, with hands that trembled, not from weakness, but from the enormity of the moment, Eliza reached upward. Her fingers brushed his, rough against rough, worn against worn. The crowd exhaled, some in outrage, some in awe. The grandmother dropped the strap, its end coiling in the dirt like a snake spent of venom. Her face hardened into stone, yet her silence carried less power than before. Jonas pulled Eliza gently to her feet. She swayed, unsteady, but her daughter pressed against her side, grounding her with a child's stubborn faith. Together they stood, a bruised woman, two fragile children, and a rancher who had nothing to his name but the steadiness of his word. What did it mean for all of them? And as the circle of townsfolk parted before them, whispers sharpening like thorns, Jonas knew the road ahead would be lined with stones. But he also knew he had already chosen it. At the far edge of the street, where the sun bled low across the rooftops, a silence opened wide, heavy with what came next. Jonas shifted the newborn in his arms and started forward, each step carrying them toward a future the town would not easily forgive. Behind them, the grandmother's voice rose in one final cry, not of command, but of warning. "What will be the next step? You'll regret this, Jonas Harrow. Mark me. The shame will spread to your very doorstep." The words followed like smoke, but the dust closed around them, and the family moved on. The road out of town gave way to silence, broken only by the crunch of boots and the faint cry of a newborn against Jonas's chest. By the time they reached the ranch, dusk had folded itself over the land. Are you enjoying this story? If so, be sure to like Saddle and Sixskin. We try to upload all our content on time so you can enjoy. The cabin rose from the earth plain as a prayer, one room of timbered walls, smoke curling faint from the chimney, a lean-to barn slouched beside it. No grandeur waited here, only weathered boards and work-worn soil. Yet in that moment it stood taller than any place Eliza May had known in years. Jonas opened the door with a push of his shoulder, the hinges groaning like old bones. The room smelled of wood smoke, leather, and the faint sweetness of cornmeal stored in sacks. A table scarred by knives and years sat square in the center. Two chairs, one tilted from use. A hearth whispered low with embers casting light that trembled across patched quilts folded at the foot of a cot. It wasn't comfort, not luxury, but it was shelter. Eliza lingered on the threshold, torn between stepping in and turning back toward the darkness she knew. Pride warred with hunger, shame with need. She clutched Mary Beth close, who clung to her skirts and whispered, "Mama, it's warm inside." The newborn whimpered. Jonas glanced over his shoulder, his hat still low, and said only, "Come on, night's no place for children." She stepped in. The door shut behind them with a hollow thud that felt too final to undo. Jonas set the baby down in a wicker basket lined with an old horse blanket. The child quieted, nestling into the warmth, as if she sensed, even in her infancy, that the danger of the street had been left behind. Eliza's knees nearly buckled with relief, though she didn't dare show it. Jonas moved without ceremony, stirring embers into flame, setting a kettle to heat, placing a plate of cornbread on the table, though it was clearly meant for his supper alone. "It ain't much," he said, "but it'll sit well." Mary Beth's eyes widened at the sight, her hunger battling the manners her grandmother had beaten into her. She looked up at her mother, waiting for permission. Eliza nodded once, tight-lipped. The girl clambered onto the chair, her small hands trembling as she reached for a piece. Eliza remained standing, her arms folded, her gaze darting to every corner as if the cabin itself might judge her. Jonas seemed to notice, but didn't press. He lowered himself into the other chair, stretching his long legs before the fire. The silence was heavy, not hostile, but full of the unspoken. At last, Jonas said, "I ain't got much but work and walls, but work can feed you, and walls can hold you safe." His voice was calm, neither pleading nor commanding. Eliza's throat tightened. "Safe is not what folks will call it." He shrugged, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Let them call it what they will. They don't sleep under this roof." Her breath hitched, half a laugh, half a sob. She turned away, hiding her face in the shadows. No man had ever spoken of her life without also speaking of what she owed in return. Jonas offered nothing but presence, and that unsettled her more than demands ever had. We'd like to thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to us here at Saddle and Sixskin. Mary Beth broke the stillness, humming a tune as she fed crumbs to her baby sister, who gurgled in the basket by the fire. The sound was light, unthinking, a child's way of stitching comfort into the air. Jonas's shoulders softened at it. Eliza noticed, though she pretended not to. Outside, the wind whispered at the eaves, rattling the shutters. Winter was settling in early. The fire snapped, throwing sparks that flared and died. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter, her mind racing with fears she couldn't voice, the whispers in town, the shame of being taken in by a man not her kin, the certainty that judgment would find them even here. Jonas rose, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside with an axe. Through the small window, Eliza watched him split wood beneath the stars. His movements were steady, patient, each swing a rhythm against the cold. He was a man worn thin by years, but not broken, and something about that steadiness unsettled her more than the grandmother's strap ever had. Mary Beth climbed into the cot and curled beneath the quilt, already half asleep. The baby breathed softly in the basket. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Jonas's silhouette against the pale night sky, the crunch of axe meeting wood carrying through the stillness. She didn't know whether to fear him, trust him, or cling to him. All she knew was that the night had swallowed her old life, and this cabin, plain as it was, held the only flame left burning for her children. And as Jonas lifted another log, sparks flying upward like fireflies lost in the dark, Eliza felt a shiver she couldn't name, half dread, half the faintest, most dangerous hope. Morning broke pale and cold, light creeping through the cracks in the cabin walls. Eliza swept the dirt floor with a bundle of twigs, each stroke deliberate, as if order could erase the stain of their circumstances. Mary Beth hummed softly while feeding her sister with careful drops of milk Jonas had bartered for. The quiet might have passed for peace if not for the unspoken weight pressing down on them all. The knock shattered it, sharp, deliberate, the sound of someone who didn't come with kindness. Jonas straightened from the table where he was mending a harness, his eyes narrowing. He wiped his hands on his trousers, set down the awl, and opened the door. On the stoop stood a neighbor woman, Mrs. Haddock, her apron tied crisp, her hair bound so tight it pulled her face into severity. In her hand she carried a loaf wrapped in cloth, but her eyes carried no generosity. "Jonas Harrow," she said, her voice clipped. "I heard tell you took in guests." Her gaze flicked past him to Eliza and the children, resting long enough to leave a sting. Jonas didn't move. "Bread's kind. You'd best step in then. We encourage our viewers to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin." She did, though her posture suggested she feared contamination. She placed the loaf on the table, then folded her hands as though delivering a sermon. "It ain't my place to meddle, but folks are talking. They say a woman's past follows her no matter how far she runs. And you, a man alone, well, tongue sharp and quick." Eliza's cheeks burned. She turned away, gathering Mary Beth close as if the child might shield her. The newborn stirred, sensing the tension in the air. Jonas's tone was even. "Tongues don't raise children. Hands do. And these children need raising." Mrs. Haddock sniffed. "There's charity, and then there's folly. Best you take those babes elsewhere before their shame takes root in your land. Men won't respect a house with scandal inside its walls. Women won't look you in the eye." Eliza flinched, the word striking deeper than leather ever had. She stepped forward, her voice low but urgent. "She's right. I shouldn't stay. You've given more than I deserve already." Jonas turned, his gaze fixing hers with quiet intensity. "If they've got mouths for poison, let them choke on it. You stay." The certainty in his tone stopped her breath. For a moment, even Mrs. Haddock faltered, unsettled by his steadiness. Then she drew herself tall, her lips pursed. "Mark my words, Jonas Harrow. You'll pay for this kindness. God sees, and so does the town." She swept out, the door shutting with a finality that left the cabin quivering in silence. Eliza's hands shook as she gathered a cloth to fold. Her voice came in a whisper, almost to herself. "You don't know what it is, living each day, waiting for someone to call your children sins." Jonas picked up the loaf she had left, broke it clean in half, and set one piece before Eliza. He didn't argue, didn't soothe with words that would only deepen the wound. Instead, he moved to the hearth, feeding the fire with a steady hand. Mary Beth tiptoed forward, a wildflower clutched in her small fist. She held it up to Jonas, who looked down in surprise. The bloom was pale, its petals ragged from her grasp, yet she offered it with shy determination. He accepted it, his rough fingers closing gently around the fragile stem. Something unspoken passed in that moment, between man and child, between despair and the smallest flicker of grace. Later, as dusk fell, Eliza rose from the cot to find Jonas seated near the fire, the newborn resting against his broad chest. He was rocking slowly, humming rough and low, a tune without words. The baby slept, her tiny fist curled around the fabric of his shirt. Eliza froze in the shadows, watching. The sight pierced her deeper than any insult. He hadn't promised her safety, nor demanded her gratitude. Yet here he sat, keeping her child as if it were his own, the weight of judgment outside the cabin paling beside this quiet act. Her throat tightened, tears threatening. For the first time in years, she felt something more dangerous than shame or fear. She felt the edge of belonging, sharp and impossible to ignore, and she wondered, though she dared not speak it, if the danger of kindness was greater than the cruelty she had always known. The first snow came sudden, as though the sky itself had decided to smother the land in silence. By morning drifts lay against the cabin walls, and the world beyond the window had turned white, vast, and merciless. The hearth became their sun, its glow the only warmth in days that stretched long and cold. Jonas worked harder than ever, mending fences that threatened to collapse under ice, chopping wood until his hands cracked and bled. Eliza patched his shirts with trembling fingers, the needle slipping as often from weariness as from doubt. Food grew thin. The cornmeal dwindled to dust, beans rationed by handfuls. Mary Beth grew quieter, her eyes large in her pale face. Eliza sang lullabies, not for the baby alone, but for herself, clinging to the sound of her own voice as proof she hadn't gone mute with despair. One evening, when the wind howled so fierce it seemed the cabin might be torn from the earth, Jonas stood and pulled on his coat. "Wood's low. Can't wait for morning." Eliza rose sharply. "You'll freeze out there." He shook his head. "Better I freeze than you and the children." The word struck her. She had known men who spoke in sermons, in boasts, in bargains. Jonas spoke in plain fact, and his plainness carried more weight than any vow. She almost reached for him, almost begged him to stay, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she watched him vanish into the storm, a dark figure swallowed by white. Hours passed. She paced, each gust rattling the shutters like the fist of some furious god. The baby whimpered. Mary Beth dozed fitfully, but Eliza couldn't rest. At every howl of the wind, she imagined Jonas lying broken in a drift, the fire within him snuffed. At last, a knock came, not at the door, but on her heart. A voice she knew too well pierced the gale. "Eliza May." She stiffened. It was her mother, cloaked in wool, snow crusting her hair like frost. The older woman's eyes were hard, yet something behind them wavered like a candle near guttering. If you've enjoyed this video, we encourage you to subscribe to us at Saddle and Sixskin. "You'll come with me now," the matriarch demanded. "This place is no fit shelter. Repent, girl, and I'll see you forgiven." Eliza clutched the cradle, standing between her mother and the children. Her body shook, not from cold, but from a lifetime of bending beneath that voice. Yet something inside her, nurtured by Jonas's quiet defiance, rose with new strength. "No," she said, her voice breaking yet steady enough to hold. "These children are not my shame. They are my mercy." The word startled even herself. They hung in the air, heavy as snow on pine. Her mother's face tightened, her lips drawn into a line of steel, but the certainty had shifted. For the first time, it was Eliza who stood tall. "You'll regret this," the older woman spat, retreating into the storm. "You'll drown in it." The door slammed shut, snow sweeping in behind her. Eliza leaned against it, trembling, her breath coming fast. She hadn't won, not truly, but she had spoken, and the speaking felt like fire in her chest. When Jonas returned, frost crusted his beard, his arms burdened with wood, his skin blown with cold. He staggered inside, near collapse, and Eliza rushed to him. For the first time, she touched him not as host or savior, but as flesh that could break. She stripped the ice from his coat, pulled him toward the hearth, her hands fierce with care. "You fool," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "You'd die for us without a thought." He tried to smile through his shivering. A man don't need saving from the cold, not when he's already been saved by warmth like this. His gaze drifted toward the children, then settled on her as though she were the fire itself. She pressed blankets around him, her fingers lingering on his scarred hands. Something inside her broke open, not shame this time, but a tenderness so sharp it hurt. She had thought herself empty, hollowed out by scorn. Now she saw there was still a well within her, deep and dangerous, waiting for someone steady enough to draw from it. The storm howled, the fire snapped, the children slept, and in the hush between heartbeats, Eliza realized she no longer felt like a guest in this cabin. She felt like part of its walls, its breath, its reason for burning. Yet with that realization came fear more piercing than any strap, more chilling than the winter beyond the door, because belonging once tasted was the one thing she couldn't bear to lose again. Spring came in shy bursts, green pushing through the thawed earth as though afraid it might be chased back into the frost. The cabin, once sealed tight against the storm, breathed again with open shutters. Smoke curled less urgently now, carrying the smell of beans and bread instead of mere survival. Mary Beth ran barefoot through the yard, her laughter startling the sparrows that had returned to the fence rails. The baby, grown stronger, gurgled in the basket by the door, sunlight warming her cheeks. What else would change? Eliza moved with a new rhythm, her hands steady in tasks that had once trembled. She kneaded bread with sleeves rolled high, humming without realizing it, the sound slipping through the cracks like something that had always belonged there. Jonas came in from the field, his shoulders bent from labor, but his eyes softened by the sight before him. For a fleeting moment, the cabin looked less like a shelter for strays and more like a home with roots. Yet the world beyond their walls hadn't forgotten. Whispers spread, following them to church, to the mercantile, to the well. Jonas felt the stares burn his back each Sunday when he stepped through the chapel doors with Eliza and the children beside him. One morning after service, a man spat in the dust and muttered, "Harrow's turned his place into a house of shame." Jonas didn't raise his fist. He only met the man's eye and said, "A house divided cannot stand. Mine will." His words carried no fire, only weight, and the man looked away first. Still, the whispers thickened like summer flies. It was near dusk when the test came. The knock at the cabin door was softer than winter's storm, but heavier in its meaning. Eliza opened it to find her mother once more, standing stiff as an iron post, her gaze sweeping past her daughter to the children playing behind. "I've come for them," she declared. "Those babes deserve a proper home, not the ruin of a man's pity." Mary Beth, hearing, darted forward and pressed herself against Jonas's side. Her small hand clutched his sleeve, her knuckles white. Her voice rose, breaking with fear. "Papa, don't let her take us." The words stilled the air. "Papa." It slipped from her lips as naturally as breathing, but it landed in the room like a thunderclap. Eliza froze, her breath caught, while Jonas looked down at the child pressed against him. His weathered face softened, not in surprise, but in acceptance, as though he had known this moment would come. He bent to Mary Beth's level, his voice gentle, but firm. "They're home, and so's their mama." Eliza's mother stiffened, outrage twisting her features. She spat words sharp as nails, accusations, curses, threats of damnation. But Jonas didn't waver. His height, his silence, his steadiness became the wall she couldn't climb. The children clung tighter, and Eliza, trembling, felt the old cords of obedience snap within her. She stepped forward, standing at Jonas's side, no longer behind him. Her voice shook, but she forced the words through. "You've beaten me enough, shamed me enough. But you will not take my children. They belong here." The grandmother faltered, her strap and her scorn both useless in the face of that unity. For a heartbeat, the old power she held flickered, then guttered like a candle in the wind. We encourage all of our viewers to subscribe here at Saddle and Sixskin. Without another word, she turned and left, her footsteps crunching away into the darkening road. Silence swelled in her absence, so vast it seemed the walls themselves exhaled. Mary Beth buried her face against Jonas's chest, her sobs muffled in his shirt. Eliza stood frozen, unable to move, her heart breaking and mending all at once. Jonas finally straightened, his arms still steady around the child, his eyes finding Eliza's across the dim glow of the cabin. There was no triumph in his look, only the quiet truth that he had chosen this road, whatever stones lined it, and he wouldn't walk it alone. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, Jonas worked by lantern light at his bench outside. Eliza watched through the window as he bent iron into shape, the ring of hammer on metal carrying softly through the spring air. By morning, she saw what he had made. From old horseshoes and bent nails, he had fashioned a wind chime, crude but sturdy, each piece welded with patience. He hung it by the porch where the evening breeze could reach it. When the first note sounded, low, rough, almost mournful, Eliza felt something within her ease. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a vow spoken before witnesses. It was a man saying, without words, "This place is marked, this family claimed, this home forged." At supper, the chime sang faintly outside the door while they ate bread torn by hand and beans cooked plain. If you have found this video to be a good one, feel free to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Mary Beth giggled at some small thing. The baby slapped the table with chubby palms, and Jonah sat with shoulders weary, but eyes quiet with peace. Eliza looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, and found him already watching her. The air held no sermon, no decree, no promise of forever, only the fragile sound of metal swaying in the wind, steady as a heartbeat, lasting as the land. And in that sound was everything they needed. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well.